Hi, Harvest class. It's Nick Reinhardt-Swierk. I am the Director of Social Justice Ministries and Young Adult Ministries here at Manchester United Methodist Church. I was super excited to come and speak with your class today, but because of the COVID-19 situation, we weren't able to meet at church today. So I just wanted to record a little bit of a video and still have a chance to share a bit of my experience and give you a little update about how Manchester is doing with our millennial and Gen Z folks. For those of you who don't know, I was raised in a United Methodist church. I grew up at Webster Hills United Methodist in Webster Groves. I lived in Oakville, but it was really important for my parents that we went to a Methodist church that had an active music program and really good children's ministry. So every Sunday we'd get up and drive, the 20 minutes into a different neighborhood in order to get to go to church. We were so picky about being Methodist because my family had been Methodist for 6 or 7 generations, we think, based on all of the John Wesleys we have named in the family tree. So for me, church was a huge deal growing up. My mom worked with the children's ministry. She sang in the choir. My dad was the accompanist for the choir. We were that family that was at church 3, 4, 5 days a week. And my faith life was really important to me growing up because of that. My sister and I would act out Bible stories when we played dress up. And at a pretty young age, I decided that I wanted to be a minister. The church was the place that I thought took care of people, and what better job is there than getting to worship and learn about God and then help other people. So as I got into high school, youth group was really important to me. One thing, it was where I usually was dating people, so I wanted to get to youth group to see the people I was dating, but it was also the first place where I really got to explore what it was like to have leadership in a religious situation, and it's the first time that I was really exposed to the complicatedness of a life of faith. I had 2 really great youth directors in a row who believed in teaching kids how to read the Bible well. I learned about the importance of historical context and study and critical thinking in faith. I was challenged to think about the ways that my faith affected not just what I believed or where I would go after I died, but how I lived things out in the world. Mission work was always really important at the church I grew up at too, much like here at Manchester. I did service projects and went on mission trips. And that's when I started to have some strong cognitive dissonance between the inequality of the world and God's call for Christians. I didn't understand why there was so much wrong in the world that Christians weren't doing anything about. So like a lot of millennials, I started to lose my faith, not necessarily because of anything regarding God, but because of the activities that I saw of other humans, right? I got wrapped up in human failing and then thought the church had failed, and it didn't make sense to me. So I went off to college. I went to DePaul University, where I studied religion and philosophy. In my first semester, I took a Paul and Early Christianity class, Nietzsche and the Nihilists, and socially engaged Buddhism. And after that semester, I left the church and considered myself an atheist, and threw myself really full-time into activism and social change work. And through, 3 or 4 years at college doing this kind of really radical activism and community care, I discovered the Jesus I had been looking for in these, radical spaces with young protesters. I met people who were willing to give up comfort and put themselves last because of what they believed and because they wanted to change the world. And that's the person that I wanted to be. And through that work, I ended up hooking up with the Catholic Workers Movement, and I found myself some really radical Christians who helped me to find my way back to faith. So my life story goes on from there, and I went to seminary in order to get involved in social change work. But this beginning part of my story is the part of my story that's similar to so many other young people in church environments. We're finding with Shared Streets, our group in the city that works with Gen Z and millennials, that about half of our group are folks who have never really been in a church environment. From those folks, we find that most of their parents are disillusioned church folks who grew up in church environments but didn't see the value of continuing that tradition for their children. The other half are young adults who've grown up in church environments but are disillusioned with the church institution. You see, the thing about especially my generation of millennials is that 9/11 happened when I was in 7th grade. Columbine happened when I was in early elementary school. My entire childhood was kind of bookended with these two tragedies that taught us that you're not safe and the things that we hold faith in can collapse suddenly. My generation is stuck with a lot of uncertainty that has led us to question everything, right? That's kind of the stereotypical thing with millennials is we're not good at being told what to do. And when we are told what to do, we really want to know why. In general, millennials tend to be good critical thinkers because we're used to having to think outside the box, but we can be bad at follow through and following steps and plans. We also can be a little hard to work with sometimes because we don't accept things automatically. Part of what we're seeing here isn't just because of our, social kind of conditioning of uncertainty. There's also this larger ideological shift that we're seeing happen with millennials and Gen Z. It started a little bit earlier, but we're really starting to see this shift. And that's the shift from the modern age to the postmodern age, right? This is like a philosophical, cultural thing that you might have heard me talk about before. But because of the explosion of technology, the way we interact with the world is fundamentally changing. The modern perspective imagines a generic human. So if we're talking in a church environment, the generic church goer. What do they need? They need worship, they need fellowship, they need a small group, right? This is our understanding of the kind of boxes to check in the plan. And this comes from philosophy since the Renaissance era, right? It's this autonomous human that we can imagine as our subject. But what's happening through technology is we're discovering there's not an objective subject. There's just lots of subjective individuals who have different perspectives, different experiences, and will need different things. So we're seeing a shift in church away from standard kind of worship and practice towards focusing on how we can do contextual ministry. How can we offer ministry that reaches people in their specific locations with their specific needs? So that's what we're doing with Shared Streets, is we're trying to figure out how can we reach young adults? How can we see what the Spirit is doing in a community of young adults for whom the context of traditional church and worship isn't really working? So what kind of people do we have at Shared Streets, right? Shared Streets is a really diverse group. About 40% of our folks are non-believers or consider themselves religious nuns. They don't have a religious identification. Out of those, 40%, we've got at least 10 or 12 that have been attending some kind of Bible study. I know my husband and a couple of others in the group identify as Jesus-following atheists, right? So we have folks who are uncomfortable with the religious identifications that we've kind of relied on, but are still interested in this organization, this group, and this person, Jesus, to see what's going on. We also are mostly LGBTQ identified folks. So most of our folks are on a gender or sexuality spectrum, and a lot of our classes reflect that. So we have classes that speak to gay experiences and trans experiences. We also have classes that talk about the things we're not supposed to talk about in church, right? Like sex and politics. We have a monthly drag show where we eat food together and talk about struggling with our bodies, and then go to a performance in which folks in our community celebrate themselves in all of their imperfect glory, right? So we're bringing our church out to where folks are and trying to figure out what their needs are and what their wants are. So Shared Streets as of now has no worship component, but we do have a Friday night fellowship group that hangs out here at my community house every Friday night. And although we don't ever plan worship, there's usually music, there's usually prayer, and there's usually discussion about God. Because what we found is when we schedule a worship service for millennials, they might not come. But when we gather millennials together, that's when worship just seems to happen. So I'm talking a lot about millennials right now because in our young adult age group, most of us are millennials. We're just starting to get those younger Gen Zers involved. And I'm still not sure about how to characterize Gen Z. I think Gen Z is still finding its footing. So far, what I can tell of Gen Z is there is a loss of truth and certainty, especially with fake news being all around throughout high school experience of Gen Z kids. I see our Gen Z kids want to break things apart. They want to understand what's happening. They want to know how things got to be the way they are. But I've also found that it's a little harder for us to motivate our Gen Z folks to remain engaged long term. I'm seeing more of a drop in and drop out kind of behavior with Gen Z folks, with the exception of Jaden and Shaylee Parson and Patrick Clover, who grew up from this church, have become a part of Shared Streets, and are now vital members of our community. So yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say. I didn't have a script planned, but I knew that I was going to come and share some testimony and thoughts about our young adult ministry. So I just wanted to give you something, even though we couldn't be together. In this video, in the comments underneath, I'm going to post a link to a video that we used to apply for a grant with Shared Streets several months ago. It's not a current accurate video with its numbers, but I'll make sure I'm clear about the date on there so you know when it can take place. Before I sign off, you probably want to know, and I didn't share the scale of how our young adult ministry is doing out here in South City. Our listserv has about 160 young adults on it who have come to at least 2 of our events. We have a Friday night hangout group, which averages around 16 people or so every Friday night at my house. The group that comes to Friday night is larger. It's about 45 folks, and each week we have a different combination of folks meeting with us. As of now, Shared Streets has programming 4 to 5 nights a week, and our classes and groups range in size from 5 or 6 folks to 12 or 15 folks. We have a community garden that we've been taking care of. So far this spring, our folks have already completed over 60 service hours in our community garden. Now, we use the food from that garden to cook and distribute meals to unhoused folks in our community, and to ensure that our food insecure folks in Shared Streets are not just eating ramen, but also getting healthy vegetables. And then our final kind of mission component, we pass out Narcan, which is a medication that you use to stop drug overdoses. And we've distributed over 40 doses of Narcan to drug users or businesses in the area. So we have trained and distributed Narcan to bartenders who might have folks who overdose in their businesses. So that's just a snapshot of who we are. I hope that you watch the video that I've posted. It's a music video, so it'll show you some of our great folks and some of our great work. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please stay home, take care of yourself, wash your hands, all that good stuff. Be kind. This is a stressful moment, but we are in one of those places where we have to admit that we are humans and we are animals, and we have to take care of our body, and our structures and our systems are going to have to work along with that. So I am praying for your health and your peace of mind during this time. Talk to you soon.